I'm Gregor Thomson, I'm a philosopher and a writer, and this is the meaning of life. Welcome to The Struggle. This episode is brought to you by The Struggle newsletter. This is a fortnightly newsletter that complements the podcast nicely, in which I send out every other Sunday a short article concerning the art of embracing struggle. We are all restricted in some way, and we could all do with struggling to break free from whatever restricts us. The struggle is different for everyone, but I can assure you the Struggle newsletter and this podcast will help you discover what it is that is restricting you and how you can best struggle to break free from that restriction. If you're finding it difficult to be more productive, to be healthy, to achieve your goals, perhaps you're chasing the wrong thing. Because a lot of us believe that we should be aiming for happiness, but this is an unwise pursuit because happiness comes and goes without any control from us. However, there is a way to be more fulfilled with life, and that is to embrace the struggle. Maybe it's exercising for you, maybe it's being healthy, maybe it's having uncomfortable conversations, maybe it's taking a career risk, maybe it's discovering who you are, paying attention to your feelings, or to be autonomous. And that's why I created a newsletter, to help you discover where you could be struggling more and where you could become more fulfilled. Along with the article, I also provide tips, strategies, and recommendations such as podcasts, movies, music, and recipes to help along the way. So to sign up completely for free, go to gregorthomson.com, the link will be in the show notes, confirm your subscription, and then check your spam folder for your welcome newsletter, and then add me to your contacts to continue to receive it in your inbox for free. And that's it. You're on your way to productively struggling more and being more healthy, motivated, and fulfilled. Now, let's get on with the struggle. This is episode 47 of The Struggle with me, Gregor Thomson, and it's the first episode of 2025. And it's the 1 year anniversary of The Struggle. So I thought for this week I would go through 24 of my favourite lessons from 2024. So let's get into it. Lesson 1. Effort and consistency knocks talent out of the park. Most ambitious pursuits fail simply because we stop pursuing them. The bigger and grander the ambition, the more effort and time is required to achieve it. So bear that in mind when you set off to achieve a grand ambition. Number 2, an examined life is not worth living. That comes from Stoic philosopher Socrates. Articulating all that hides in the dark corners of our psyches is the most effective way to break free from whatever restricts us. Either you listen to what your emotions are trying to tell you, or you distract yourself from them and become the prisoner of your emotions. Number 3, do what you do deliberately. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you're aware of it. As long as you deliberately do what you do, even if it's what the majority do, you will live authentically. The best way to be authentic is to become aware of why you do what you do. On a local level, so many of us pick up the phone to scroll or pour ourselves a glass of wine without truly contemplating why we are doing so. Every action we take is preceded by an emotion. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge the emotion before you act in response to it. You might be unconsciously distracting yourself from it. It might have an answer or two. And on a global level, so many of us spend the majority of our time working a job we aren't even interested in, or we work unconsciously and end up working a job for 10 years without even realizing it. So make sure the job you're doing now is what you should be doing, regardless of what it is. For instance, I've worked in retail for 8 years. I'm not particularly passionate about it. However, I've done so deliberately so I had time to study for my degree in journalism and my master's degrees in digital sociology and philosophy, and I work in retail now deliberately so I have time to write and record this podcast. Number 4, state, then story, then strategy. This comes from author and coach Tony Robbins, and in a nutshell it states that you should only tell yourself a story about yourself when you're in a productive state. When you're lying on the couch binge watching television and eating junk food, you're not exactly in the best state, meaning you won't tell yourself a very empowering story about yourself. You might call yourself lazy or worse, but is it any wonder when you're in that physical state? Then, with this lazy story about yourself, you're more likely to come up with a subpar strategy moving forwards. I'm lazy, so I might as well keep lying on the couch. Whereas if we put ourselves in a productive state through something like exercise or doing the dishes, we then have a better story about ourselves. I'm more organized now, which then leads to a more effective strategy. If I can do the dishes, then I can plan my week or make a healthy dinner. State, then story, then strategy. Number 5. Power follows the finger. Whatever or whoever you blame for your failures, pain, or suffering in the present or in the future has power and control over what you do and how you feel. Whereas if you take responsibility for your actions, if we turn the finger of responsibility towards ourselves, we give ourselves the power to change and grow. Number 6. A fulfilling life comes from balancing dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol. For instance, dopamine Gregor is responsible for pursuits. Serotonin Gregor is responsible for feelings of love, gratitude, and connection. And cortisol Gregor is responsible for experiencing healthy levels of stress. When we effectively balance pursuing an ambition, time with loved ones, and feelings of gratitude, and the healthy stresses that come with pursuing ambitious goals, we feel in alignment and fulfilled. Number 7. Have more fun. This year, I found that my days were filled with activities, behaviours, and tasks that were productive for sure, but they weren't exactly fun. As much as it is healthy to be productive and to partake in healthy behaviours and habits, what isn't healthy is the constant mental masturbation of constantly reasoning and planning a day on what is healthy rather than what is fun. You end up going for a walk in nature or going for a run because Dr. Andrew Huberman said it's good for you rather than doing so because you enjoy it. Have more fun. Number 8. Rock bottom is better than complacency. What we should fear most is neither loving or hating our lives. Becoming comfortable in this indifference is worse than rock bottom because at least if things can't get any worse, they can only get better. But a life of complacency certainly is a life, but it is not lived. A life of complacency means you are sleepwalking through life without any true contemplation why you're doing what you're doing. It's better to quit your high-paying but passionless and time-consuming job to pursue what you really want to do than to stick it out in the high-paying job and regret it in 10 years. Number 9. You are not the first thought you have when you wake up. You are the rebuttal. We cannot possibly control our thoughts and whatever pops into our head. And we most certainly will have painful, guilt-ridden, shameful, or downright inhumane thoughts. However, we aren't identical to our thoughts. We must accept their existence and know that they have an evolutionary function. When we think of murdering someone, for instance, we can either lambaste ourselves for the thought uncontrollably popping into our heads, or know that our brains play out simulations of wrongful behaviour precisely because we know they are wrong and to prevent them from occurring. Lesson 10. Productivity Debt by Oliver Burkeman. Quote, many people, by which I meant me, seem to feel as if they start off each morning in a kind of productivity debt, which they must struggle to pay off throughout the day in hopes of reaching a zero balance by the time evening comes. Few things feel more basic to my experience of adulthood than this vague sense that I'm falling behind and need to claw my way back up to some minimum standard of output. It's as if I need to justify my existence by staying on top of things in order to stave off some ill-defined catastrophe that might otherwise come crashing down upon my head. So that comes from author Oliver Burkeman's book, 4,000 Weeks, and it's an incredible book. We need to stop telling ourselves at the start of the day that we're at minus 100 and that we have to frantically crawl our way back up to zero to feel like we are enough. And we need to starting our day at zero and congratulating ourselves for all that we do to finish the day on a plus, even if it's just 2. It's better to end a productive day and being grateful for getting to 98 rather than lambasting ourselves for the remaining 2. Lesson 11. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. That comes from philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. This can also be altered to say that life is lived forwards, but felt backwards. We rarely, if ever, realize the significance of an experience during the experience itself. It's far more likely that we'll realize the emotional significance of an event after it's passed. Knowing this, we can learn to relax in the moment and just fucking experience it, rather than telling ourselves how important it is to be present or reminding ourselves about the significance of an experience in the experience itself, ironically distracting ourselves from the experience. Lesson 12. You're never going to order your life to such an extent that it becomes predictable and certain. Life is uncertain, and the more we embrace that truth, the better equipped we'll be to handle change, and perhaps even bring it on ourselves. There will never be a right time to drastically change our lives, so we might as well voluntarily embrace change and become braver in the process. Number 13. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. That comes from economist and political philosopher Thomas Sowell. This quote hits me for 2 reasons. Firstly, those of us who strive to achieve ambitious goals must acknowledge that we are sacrificing in order to achieve it. And we must acknowledge what we are sacrificing in order to achieve it, because the very nature of ambition dictates that a sacrifice is necessary. On the extreme end of this is your Elon Musks and your Tiger Woods. For both of these men have suffered from issues ranging from extreme stress to addictions to turbulent love lives, but they've also achieved massively ambitious goals. Jason Pargin said, "Your heroes aren't gods. They're just regular people who probably got good at one thing by neglecting literally everything else." You have to be comfortable with what you sacrifice in order to achieve a goal. The second reason why Sowell's quote hits me so hard is because I've been trying for so long, for as long as I can remember in fact, to order my world, to make it predictable and to solve problems superficially or externally. If I felt pain emotionally, I would distract myself from it or attempt to solve it externally with logical or objective solutions like exercise, supplements, or seemingly healthy behaviors. However, some aspects of your life are not meant to be solved, but rather investigated. A prime example of this is your emotions. You can't solve your emotions, but you can accept them and investigate their very existence. I do realize that this may contradict the previous lesson of state, then story, then strategy, but as much as it is important to put yourself into empowering states before you strategize your day, it's also important to check in with your emotions and refrain from trying to order your world to such an extent that you're blindsided whenever chaos emerges or painful emotions crop up. Number 14 is the backwards law by Alan Watts. The act of seeking reinforces the fact of negation. You reinforce what you lack. Now, we see seeking something as positive because we want something. It's something positive. But it's actually something negative. The seeking of something reinforces the fact that you don't have it. Thus, you persistently seek wealth, the less wealthy you're going to feel. The more you search for happiness, the more it will elude you. And the more you seek peace, the less peaceful you'll feel. If only we could just accept what is rather than what could be, we might just feel like we are enough now. Lesson 15 is every way you try to avoid an unwanted emotion, you actually create it. And that comes from executive coach Joe Hudson. Now I'm just going to leave that question there for you to ponder for yourself. In what ways do you try to avoid an unwanted emotion? And does it actually create it? Lesson 16. One of the reasons that the perception of time speeding up happens as people get older is because their openness to experience starts to decline, particularly after 55. Your openness to experiences increases through your teenage years and into your early 20s. It stays relatively constant until your mid-50s. You've got to fight against that if you don't want time to go terrifyingly fast and suddenly life is over. That comes from author Arthur Brooks. When you think of the profoundly great times of your life, weren't they mostly the times in which you were doing something you didn't regularly do? Surely it wasn't those monotonous drives to work when you took the same route you always did. Surely it wasn't those small talk conversations about the weather. Surely it wasn't those meals of fish fingers and chips or beans on toast. And I'm definitely not knocking either of those meals, by the way. Surely it was that drive you took with your friends when you decided to just drive somewhere new, not knowing where. Surely it was those meaningful conversations over drinks you had on you and your partner's first date that lasted 8 hours. Surely it was that time on holiday when you were somewhere new in a restaurant you had never been, trying food you had never tasted. Time moves extremely fast when you do the same thing day in and day out. If you recede into routines, sameness and comfort, your life will be over in a flash. But if you open yourself up, take a break from the routines and sameness every once in a while, and get out of your comfort zone, you'll slow time down and you'll make your life more joyful. Rule 17, don't neglect life in favour of work. In September of 2024, I took a break from recording the podcast and writing the newsletter, and this break was a response to me frantically attempting to impress myself and others by recording every single week and never missing a week. I'm now attempting to balance work with fun, achieving and resting. This is an ongoing process, so I'm sure I'll learn more lessons regarding this in 2025, but we probably could all do with not neglecting fun in favour of work. Lesson 18 is stop chronically living in the future. A lot of people on social media, the productivity gurus, the growth mindset teachers, and the extremely disciplined motivational speakers will tell you to live in the future. Of course, they don't do this explicitly, but they do this implicitly when they tell you to get up early so your future self gets more done. They tell you to exercise every day so you feel better or fitter later and healthier. They tell you to grind now and work ridiculously long hours to achieve greatness in the future. I've certainly been guilty of this in the past. However, the fundamental issue with this is the implication that you are not worthy now unless you grind yourself into an exhausted mess. The implication is that you could be better, which is certainly true, but the idea that you aren't enough now is false. You do not need to earn your right to relax or to be loved. I'm all for working hard, but not at the chronic expense of the present. I'm not willing to sacrifice the meaningful and great life I have now for a better one later. I am willing to sacrifice some of it, but not all of it. One thing I realized over the last year is that I have been perpetually grinding and punishing my present self for a better future self. I was forgetting to pay attention to what it was all for and to what's most meaningful. Because my future is not what's most meaningful because it isn't real yet. My present is, however. Working hard is certainly useful, but you need to balance that working for the future with being in the moment. Lesson 19. You won't solve everything. You will never complete all of the things. Whilst it sounds depressing to know that you won't ever complete everything, you won't read every book you've ever wanted to read, you won't always have an immaculate house, you won't ever have an empty washing basket for longer than a day, and you won't ever be satisfied by external sources, it's actually incredibly freeing. You don't have to do everything. You never did have to do everything. You can stop trying to juggle everything and concentrate on what's most meaningful. Besides, do you really want to have completed everything? Of course not. What you really want is to not feel like you're being dragged and calmly stroll through your day with control and intentionality. You certainly want something to do, but not the pressure that comes with trying to do it all. You will not do it all, so stop trying to and live within the blissful confines of your imperfection. Number 20, courage and bravery are not personality traits. This idea comes from retired Navy SEAL Jocko Willink and philosopher Sam Harris. To be courageous is not to act with the absence of fear, it's to act courageously. By doing something courageous, you foster courage in yourself. Being brave is not a personality trait. Being brave is acting brave. Inspiration has a similar nature. You're not going to feel inspired all the time. There isn't such a thing as inspired people. There are people who foster inspiration in themselves. Most of the time, you're not going to feel inspiration. So why not just start doing the thing? I'll bet that once you've started, inspiration will follow. Some of the time, inspiration is what you earn from work. Other times, you stumble across it when you let your mind wander. Either way, no good can come from lambasting yourself when you don't feel inspired. Lesson 21 is the lonely chapter. Now, I'm going to let Tommy Nguyen's summary in his article in Medium do all the talking here. So it goes as follows. At some point, you start developing habits that improve your character. Maybe you started reading books, meditating, taking fitness seriously, or stopped indulging in instantly gratifying content. As a result, your friends around you start drifting away one by one. They don't fit in with your building character. But you're not sufficiently developed to a degree where you can meet people at the other end of your self-improvement journey. A new set of friends, people who had already been through the lonely chapter. In this chapter, you will struggle to see signs of success. The end of tunnel is far beyond your vision scope, and there are only two directions, forwards or backwards. Stay lonely. Understand that few people in this world are confident. Those who aren't will see your successes and they will feel like shit. They'll drag you down to their standards. Lesson 22. All emotions are informative. In order to thrive, humans must experience all forms of existence, and unfortunately that must include pain, grief, anxiety, restlessness, and uncertainty. All emotions are informative, but only if we allow them in. Boredom is not something to extinguish. Perhaps it's there to show you that what you're doing in the moment simply isn't holding your attention. Or it's telling you that the career you chose isn't right for you. Or maybe it's telling you to stop, take a rest, and do nothing. Embrace the boredom. Maybe your mind is craving that, but you'll never know if you constantly distract yourself from it. Perhaps feelings of anxiety are your psyche's attempt to guide you towards what needs to be addressed within the deep, dark corners of your mind and past. We need to start questioning why we're doing what we're doing, and we need to start becoming aware of our impulses. This is the most fundamental step we can take to avoid being ruled by our impulses. An awareness of all feelings will guide you towards authenticity and ultimately fulfillment. Perhaps we are so anxious and depressed because we have no idea how to feel feelings. Perhaps we've been trying so hard to avoid feelings that it's impossible for us to even know what we're feeling. An awareness of supposedly negative feelings might just make you feel better. All feelings are informative and should be listened to. Let them in rather than frantically trying to keep them out. No wonder you're tired. Lesson 23 is internal problems cannot be solved externally. The majority of us, when we are experiencing an issue psychologically, attempt to solve it or fix it externally with behaviors or habits like social media, alcohol, drugs, even exercise or buying stuff. However, all of these attempts are futile as they either distract from the problem or make it worse. Internal problems are to be recognized and examined internally, but they can never be solved externally. And finally, number 24, don't make a false idol of your imagined future. We all fall prey to living in the future, creating incredibly enticing but imaginative futures to comfort us. But be aware that this has the potential to make the present bearable but not enjoyable, and it makes the future quite possibly disappointing. Life in the present becomes easy if we tell ourselves it will be better when such and such occurs. But if we hold the future to such a high regard, we are in danger of making it a false idol. Will Smith spoke about this with regards to money. Quote, Money and success doesn't change people. They merely amplify what's already there. When Smith was poor, he had hope that he could become successful and rich, and that would solve all of his problems. But then when fame and fortune came, hope was lost because he didn't have some external savior to hope for. I've had similar thoughts when it comes to success. Like, once I've made it, then I can relax. Or once I make X amount, then I can spend my days reading by the pool. However, what makes me think that I'll be able to relax if I struggle to do so now? Podcaster Chris Williamson says, we sacrifice the thing we want, happiness, for the thing which is supposed to get it, success. Figure out how to enjoy life now. Don't make a false idol out of an imagined future. And there you have it. 24 lessons from 2024. Now, lastly, I just want to thank everyone who has supported me, who has read the newsletter, listened to or watched the podcast, and all of those who have spoken about the positive impact the podcast or newsletter has had on them. As much as these projects are my own projects that I do so that I can figure out the best and most fulfilling way to live, they're essentially me brainstorming ideas and thinking out loud. And whilst I intend for them to grow for myself, the fundamental reason that I started writing and recording this year was to give the gift of psychological discovery that I have received through therapy to as many people as possible. Of course, there's a limit to how deep this help can go. However, I hope through posing questions and discussing theories and ideas that I have helped you in some way. And I hope that this coming year I can do the same. So stay tuned for another year of the struggle, and I wish you all the best for the coming year, and hope you can find more freedom and fulfillment in 2025. As always, the answer lies in the struggle. So keep on struggling. Hi guys, just a few more things before you take off. Firstly, thank you so much for watching. It genuinely means a lot to see people watching and liking the content. Second, if you're enjoying the content, please subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you can support the podcast. As you can probably tell, I don't have a team behind me helping with recording or editing the podcast, and I certainly don't have a lot of fancy equipment, so any help or support is greatly appreciated because it will help the podcast grow and get better. And finally, keep on struggling.